important. I am recording. I got the little red dot in my cloud. Good. So I want you to watch it on Zoom if possible, but I know if you're going to a hockey game or lacrosse or softball, whatever you're doing, a lot of times you can't get that Wi-Fi while you're on the road. I know the buses are supposed to have mobile Wi-Fi, but you know, you may have good, you might be like on the softball field. You can't play softball and do this. So that's why I record these things for your reference. But if you can, be on Zoom, just like these guys. And I put everything on Canvas, PowerPoints, and everything. So I want everybody to not get penalized for being on a sports team. Some of you may end up being quarantined. Hopefully not, but it could happen. You get exposed to somebody who tested positive for COVID, they'll want you to not spread the virus. And so whatever happens on that front, let me know and do what the health experts tell you to do. Just keep me posted. And again, I want you guys to do well. I want you guys to keep up. And if there's anything more I can do, please let me know. I want to finish up with some of with the PowerPoint I had here. Last week. And so Jericho, I think somebody and I were talking about this piece. Bottom line, this is memorializing the dead. There's so many things that happened in ancient cultures that still persist today. A lot of what we've seen so far really is kind of the origins of who we are today and across the world. No matter where your ancestors come from, we're looking like a lot of it is universal. But we center on these places partly because these are the places that were discovered first. And Jericho has been in place and been there. Actually, I'll show you this slide, move up a little bit. Aerial view of Neolithic Jericho, 8,000 to 7,000 before Common Era. So this is the town's like 10,000 years old. And part of what makes it significant is that it is the oldest known constantly inhabited city on the earth. There have been other places where we have civilizations, we have populations, and then they go away, they come back. We talk about Jericho and a lot of these ancient places. This kind of spills into chapter 2, but it's important. We find all of the permanent settlements from ancient times along a fresh water source. And so, like we find these ancient villages in the Alps, say Central Europe, they'll be by a huge lake. But mostly we find these settlements by rivers because water is probably the first criterion that that you need, period. Without water, you don't really have much else, but with water, you can irrigate, develop agriculture, you can grow your food, and you can take care of your livestock too, as well as take care of your population, keep them hydrated, be able to, as we still do today, use water as a means of getting rid of our waste. Of course, we're trying to fix that, but it's an ancient practice of just put it in the river, it'll go away. But anyway, go back to this guy right here. Ancient ancestor worship. And that's something that we still do today too. In some way or another, we honor our dead. We honor, in a broad sense, important people. Now, we don't know who this guy is, but they had taken his skull and they had put his features back on the skull with plaster, and they painted it. And these inlaid seashells were probably in a little better shape than they are today. Round, white seashells, and probably had a pupil painted on them. This probably at one point looked like this person. Ancient ancestor worship. Well, we still doing that today? There's an interesting question. Bottom line, I got a lot of things. I'm trying to think of the best order in which to put them. How many of you, you don't have to answer, if you're Catholic, bottom line, what happens? Catholics, a church that's been around for 2,000 years, they do a lot of ancestor worship. Well, first of all, they name a lot of schools, churches, hospitals after their esteemed ancestors. One of the other things they do, have you heard of relics? Oh, relics are artifacts from those very same holy people. And it could be, and there's usually one in every church, and it has a relic somewhere inside the altar, typically, which could be something as kind of unusual as like a finger bone or something. So we still worship our ancestors today. What is history? What do? We go to Washington, D.C., at the Washington Monument, Jefferson Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and so, ancestors. It appears we've been doing ancestor worship for thousands of years. It's something that has persisted. One of the things that went along with ancestor worship and persisted into the 20th century was death mass. And that is where they would do something different than this. They would take someone when they first die, when they first pass away, and do plaster or wax mold of their face. And then they would cast this in something. Lead, gold, steel, something. That would be a death mask. And that's stuff happened even in the United States up until, about 75 years ago. So anyway, Jericho that is really one of the significant issues in all of this art that we're looking at. I hope you see it too. I hope you agree that it kind of points to a lot of things, a lot of our behaviors, a lot of our beliefs that persist today. And so one of the places that we know existed 9,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, Catalhoyuk, Turkey. And this is a restored view. And I want to kind of just say the places that exist are typically made of stone. We're still in the Stone Age, primarily. And that's why when we take a look at this aerial view of Neolithic Jericho, what does Neolithic mean? It's Keanu Reeves from, what's that series of movies? The Matrix, yes. Yeah, Neo, that's it. Neo just means new. It's Latin, means new. Lithic means stone. And basically what we're talking about here is New Stone Age. When we're talking about this, that's Neolithic Jericho. And what we're moving out of, or when we have this, I should say, this is kind of the last phases, the newest phases, periods of the Stone Age. But you can see in this picture, this restored village, it's mostly wood, organic material, mud, post and stuff. And I got to get back here where I can reach the mountains. And finally, I just wanted to talk about this, post and lintel. And that is a construction and engineering and architectural type of opening that we still make today. Underneath this door is a post and lintel. You got two posts, one on either side, and a lintel across the top. That's how they do things. And that was something that was an architectural discovery or invention that allowed for a lot of things to be built in the Stone Age. And so we'll see as we go through this course, many other developments in architecture that will increase what you could do. For instance, we'll take a look at the archway, which was something that was invented by the Romans. We'll see concrete, which is essentially stone. It's essentially limestone is what it is, but you can mix it, pour it, let it dry, and you can make roads, you can make skyscrapers, all this stuff. Anyway, bottom line, probably the most famous of the post and lintel architectural accomplishments is this. This is Stonehenge, and it's in England, and it's in the southwest corner of England. And how many of you have seen this? Nobody? I'm going to have a panic attack. Sometimes I ask you guys these things because I don't want to bore you with stuff. But at any rate, this is famous. This is hugely famous. And it I think in recent times it's reemerged as an important site, probably because as people around the world were very interested in rediscovering our past. Second thing is, we believe this was a religious site, and it's kind of tied to a lot of pre-Christian belief systems. Now, things we know for sure, we know that this served as a calendar of sorts. And at certain points of the year, you could track where the sunrise would be and where the sun would set. Why would that be important? Well, you have to know when summertime comes around. You have to know when spring comes around. Because if you're doing things like planting crops, you need to know when to do that. You need to know when it's going to be wet and rainy. You need to know when it's going to be hot and dry. Of course, if you live in Missouri, all of this could be anytime. But there, just for argument's sake, you have to know where the winter is as well. So what you can do from here is calculate where the sun will rise during the summer solstice, which is June 20th, 21st. It fluctuates because we don't have a perfect 365-day year. That's why we have a leap year. But then on the change of the centuries, we don't have a leap year. It's kind of crazy how it does. But bottom line, they could get it within a day. And they would know when the middle of winter would be, which is the winter solstice. Winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. Summer solstice, the longest day of the year. You can get all of this kind of information right off your weather app. They'll tell you when the sun rise and set and all of that kind of thing. Bottom line is, ancient people were sophisticated enough to figure this out. And as I said, there's some renewed interest in Stonehenge. They find out this is like a big circle, and they're finding that out in this plain here at various points, they're finding little artifacts that have been buried. And it's almost geometric in its precision, and it's artifacts that they think came from all over Europe and Africa. They think that people actually traveled hundreds, if not thousands of miles to get to this place. So it was a cultural, religious, and like I say, a lot of spiritualists are looking at pre-Christian religions for inspiration. And so there's a lot of things going on, and Stonehenge is kind of the epitome of ancient Neolithic structures. And I have here, I put in some links. This is on the PowerPoint. And I wanted to just hopefully, I got to make sure I got my share right. Can you guys see that at home?
I can.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, oldest art discoveries. And a couple of points I want to make here. This is a site called Active Arts, and it's basically kind of a newsletter. It's not this great scholarly publication, but it's kind of nice to know. It's kind of like BuzzFeed or something, except it's about art. And so I wanted to show you this. Bimbek and Dakari Chatan cupules. The oldest piece of art in the world has been identified as the first piece of prehistoric art that has ever been discovered. The two pieces were unearthed in caves in India and date back to 700,000 BC, which is like 20 times, no, 20 times. So we're talking about Glasgow being about 15,000 years old, 700,000. That's crazy. And it starts to bring in, and there's some other ones that have come up around different places. This was discovered in the Golan Heights, which is right there at Lebanon and Israel. So it's in the Middle East. And, Blombo's cave paintings. And we're oldest pieces of sub-Saharan artwork. And these are two pieces of colorful red rock. Doesn't exactly say, but you can do more research on this. But it says, this is kind of interesting. This piece of art demonstrates that pre-humans had the capacity of understanding symbols. So the kinds of things they're finding now, and the research is still kind of in its infancy, if you will. But they're finding out that a lot of these pre-human hominids had a lot of the same characteristics as we do. Homo erectus, Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and so on. All of these people that were around before we have the advent of what we call modern humans, Homo sapiens. Bottom line, this stuff is really in our DNA. And so I want to, let's see, I got to get back like this. Let's bring it down. And so let me see. New share. Stonehenge. Just saying. Neolithic monument link. Okay, there's other things they're finding. That there were Neolithic monuments in England before Stonehenge. That's a new discovery. And archaeologists figured out why Stonehenge sandstone boulders have lasted for millennia. Because, I'll tell you what it says, it was a kind, it has these little particles of quartz inside the granite, which made it a lot stronger. They're microscopic, they couldn't tell, and they wouldn't do that kind of testing on Stonehenge itself. But there was a guy who in World War II was stationed in England, and he picked up a piece of Stonehenge and put it in his pocket. And now, as an old man, he decided that he'd repatriate that piece of rock. And so anyway, it left it open for scientists to expect its chemical composition. So anyway, talking about that, I just want to say this, because it's going to come up a lot. Until, until after the Second World War, people, when they went places, didn't think anything about just taking souvenirs home. We'll look at the Parthenon in Greece, very famous building, probably the most important site of Greek architecture. And it was blown up. It was destroyed in the 17th century, and there were pieces thrown all around it. People, when they went to Greece, would take a little pebble and put it in their pocket. So now they're trying to put it back together. There are a lot of pieces. Anyway, let's see. Okay. I'm sorry. Trying to get this. Yeah, making sure we're sharing the right things. And so there are other things. There's more prehistoric art. This stuff there are discoveries made all the time. I get this stuff on my email. I get 3 or 4 of these articles a week, different kinds of things. So the research is ongoing, and in some ways it kind of makes the textbook obsolete, especially about prehistoric art. But even in cultures we know a lot about, they're finding new tombs, new mummies, new burial sites, new artifacts in Egypt, and so on. So anyway, and this, if you get a chance, I'm not going to open this up and force it on you, but bottom line, it says African sculpture and the Imperial French invention of, and basically it's kind of a description of how ancient cultures have been demeaned by scholars through the years. And this is the invention of the primitive. And what we're finding out, honestly, a lot of things that were considered primitive are not primitive. In fact, they're pretty sophisticated. And that brings us here. And this is chapter 2. Let's see. First of all, this is the art of Mesopotamia. We've been kind of bouncing around Europe and Africa mostly, in the Middle East. Now we're going to look at the Near East, the modern day lands of Iran and Iraq, and a little bit, it goes probably down to Turkey and so on. But here is the map. And so there's Saudi Arabia, there's Iran, there's Iraq. And you'll see a lot of these names pop up: Sumer, Babylon, Akkad, Assyria, probably the foremost cultures. And what happened over that time is that a culture would be dominant for a few centuries, and then somebody else would take over. These were not countries per se, but they were city-states. And human civilization pretty much existed as city-states well before they became organized into a country. And so they were cities and countries all in one. I have here, this is not an accident that they put this as figure 1 in chapter 2. This is the Warnka vase, and it's one of the oldest examples, probably the oldest example. And it's from the Inanna Temple, and it's from modern day Iraq. But what's important about it is how the art is, how we've, let's see, can I get the, looking for the zoom in, it's not showing it. Maybe I need to do the slideshow. We'll handle it that way. Zoom in. There we go. What they invented was a way to tell stories that would persist for thousands of years. You can read this, you can understand how Egyptian art can be translated. What we have here is a description of their civilization. And it's got we got this beast of burden here, some kind of ox or something of some sort. And we see a wine vessel and vats full of what we think is bread and so on. This tells you that these are prosperous people. They have plenty to eat and drink. Their civilization is developed enough that they have irrigation. And in fact, these cultures all along the Tigris and the Euphrates, as I said a moment ago, you find these along rivers and freshwater sources. They learned how to irrigate. They dug irrigation ditches and they figured out how to block them off or let the water in. They were pretty sophisticated. And we're talking about 5,500 years ago. And so zoom in on the second, and here they are as they produce the wine, the bread, the food. And we'll go down one. And so here are the kind of the people on the farm. Here's the livestock, etc. We don't have a full picture of this, but it's telling you a story about prosperity and how they raised their food and they ate and being able to eat, not going hungry and starving. That is prosperity. And so the Warnka vase, it does all that, and it does it in a way that we have these bands across the vase, you see. And those are called registers or friezes. They're done in low relief, bas relief. We've seen some of that in ancient cave art. And so they're done in bands. And it becomes a way of telling a story visually. It becomes what we would call an artistic convention. This is a conventional style. They invented this, as far as we know. And this is the White Temple. And this is where the Wonka base came from. And this is in pretty poor shape, but you can kind of get an idea of what this looked like in its time, in its glory days. We got some other examples. This is what it should have looked like, and we think that it was basically these shapes that kind of look like gold bars or something, but they're huge. And on top would be the temple. We'll take a look at that. That would be up here. We could see the plateau, but you know, time. One of the things, and there's another piece from that place. We have the temples not there, but they certainly left a lot of artifacts. And female head, Iana, we think she's the goddess. She's the consort. She's important. And so it basically, well, first of all, it's made out of marble. And if you've done marble, you know, it's a little harder than the limestone and some of the other materials we've seen. So they had the capacity to sculpt from marble, and you see the nose is broken off, but you can see it has a pretty high degree of naturalism. Would you agree with that? You could almost say, if you saw this woman in the hallway, you would say, we look pretty good for being 5,300 years old. Just say. But you would recognize her. It's that natural enough. And one of the things that we find in ancient Assyria and through all of these cultures is this, and the eyes are gone. Probably had some kind of shells, seashells or something of the sort, but the eyes are big. And here are pull this down here. Yeah. Here are a couple of worshipers, statuettes, and they're, you know, they're not that awful big. They're less than 3 feet tall. And this one's 2 feet, just under 2 feet. And you see, these are like kind of a combination of naturalism and symbolism. And so you can kind of pick out the natural parts in the fact that you recognize these as human beings, as first and foremost. But a lot of it is, and the clothing is, you can figure that out. There's enough difference between the two that you would know that this was maybe likely a woman, this a man, obviously facial hair. But this has some other features I want to point out. The first and most obvious one. Look at those eyes. Okay, I'll give you a hint. That's symbolic. That's not natural. Why? What would that symbolize? Well, nobody knows for sure, so anything you say could be right. I'll tell you what the common the accepted explanation is that these people were given big eyes because they could see more than ordinary people. They're worshipers, they're there at the temple, and they are super aware. And so that's kind of the idea. And if you will, and use modern terminology, you could say they were woke. Oh, they can see things. They can see things. They can see the big picture, if you will. There's another part of this that I want to talk to you, mention briefly, and that is the braided beards, and that persists through all of these different cultures: Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian. They do this, and almost all of their male depictions have long beards, and they're typically braided as such. Tells us a couple of things. One is that this person was probably not a field hand, wasn't out there chasing down the cows, harvesting corn, whatever. And so it's a status thing. And we'll see that. That's a characteristic of Mesopotamian sculpture. This is in Damascus. See, I told you, it kind of goes out a little bit beyond Mesopotamia. Statuette, big eye. And if we knew who it was, we would say that. That would be in the title. We don't know. But I'll back this up a little bit. I'll show you this though. This is 2450. So it's like almost 900 years from the other ones that we saw. So this idea of the big eyes is something that lasts for a long time. This, to me, is magnificent. It's called a bull-headed harp, inlaid with inlaid sound box, and that inlay is right there. It's 4,500 years old. Gold, lapis lazuli, which is a blue semi-precious stone, red limestone, and shell. They use a lot of shells in their inlay. Bottom line, we still do some of that, especially if we have like oysters. If you ever notice this, but you can get this stuff called mother of pearl, and you can get that from oyster shells. Oysters produce pearls, but the inner part of the shell is this magnificent blend of white and a lot of color, and it's actually very attractive. And they use that. You see, this is in the British Museum, and again, another example of how the colonists came through and took a lot of stuff. And it's really pretty cool. It doesn't say what the strings are made of, which I think is kind of a shame. But it has these sticks on top so that you can tune this. You guys play guitar, ukulele, banjo, you got the keys at the end of the neck, tighten the strings. Same here, except 4,500 years ago. And the strings themselves, I don't know what they're made of. It doesn't say. There's probably a good chance that it could be cat gut. You ever heard of that? Any violin players here? Well, it is just like what it sounds. Intestines from a cat. You dry them, they're strong. They make noise. Go over. Anyway, here's the sound box inlay. And you see something else going on here. This persists for a few thousand years too. The hybrid. Part animal, part human. And so we see these guys here. We see a guy here, and we see two bulls with human faces. You see this happen all over the place. I want you to think about that. Do we still do that today? Maybe, maybe not. Saying no. I think we do, actually, but we don't, it's not on this high status. But let me tell you about who does Marvel comics around here. Stan Lee, the great Stan Lee, got his inspiration from ancient art and ancient cultures. He got a character called Thor, which comes right out of Norse mythology. But how about things like Spider-Man, a human being that has some characteristics of an arachnid? And so anyway, I think in some ways we still kind of do that, but it's not on this elevated status of like at the White House or something, you know. But this is where this stuff comes from. And Stan Lee would happily tell you that he's a fan of this kind of art. And this is a seal, cylinder seal, that's it right here. And this is the impression it makes. And a seal, we still use that a lot too. Actually, still do a little bit today, not so much, not with electronic documents and so on. But you get something notarized, the notary has this thing, he or she'll emboss on the paper their seal to say this is an authentic document. Well, in ancient times, they had the same thing. It was this way to authenticate whatever document you had. And you put some wax, hot wax down, and then roll this thing over the top and make this image. 2550 BCE, 4,500 years ago, and they still do that. If you see things like treaties between nations and stuff like that, they'll actually do that. They'll take some hot red wax and stamp it. And ordinary people did that until about 100 years ago. Mailed a letter. You wanted the person to know two things: that it was unopened and not read by somebody else. And the second thing is that it was authentic. And the sealing wax did both of those things. And one of the big discoveries from this time, the standard of the standard. I was always wondering, what does this, why do they call it that? A standard. Well, I found out, I did research and I found out that standard, the sense that this word is used is that it's like a flag. You have a flag and your army has the stars and stripes. You know that you're the Americans in this battle and the other side has something. That's their standard. That's their flag standard. is just another word for flag. And that's what they thought this was when they found it. It's probably not accurate. But you can see 4,500 years ago, wood, lapis lazuli, shell, red limestone. Bottom line, it's the same technique, the same materials, but again, like the Warnka vase, let's take a close look at this. We have over here the chariot, the horses, the soldiers, the attendant, the horse boy, taking care of all of this. And who would this be? You can take a guess. You can be wrong. It's okay. I'm wrong a lot. Let me tell you. Okay, yes, sir. Oh, the guy in the center, right here. King? Yeah, I like that. I think you're right. I would fully agree with that. Why? Why would that be the king? Okay, I got this thing here. I'm partially deaf and I'm 67 years old.
I was gonna say, yeah, like the little staff.
Yeah, he's got some kind of symbol, which could be like a scepter or something. Because in this day and age, they actually invented that sort of thing. It's something that carried on for thousands of years. Is there any other indicator? He's the biggest, yes. See, we learned how to read this stuff. As I was saying, from the Warnka vase, and these are better, these are even more conventions. And the conventional practice is to make the most important person, first of all, highest and largest. He's the one that actually breaks the ceiling here. Comes right through, he's bigger, more important. And so these guys over here, this is called the war side, by the way. These guys over here, they are the vanquished. They are the ones that were defeated. So some of them don't even have clothes. They're all beaten and battered. And probably the king is saying, you were a worthy adversary. We're going to enslave you or go back home or something. This is, it's called the war side because this had two different narratives. But let's show you this. And again, this is the battle. There's the soldiers, again, the vanquished over here. This is, they were just really they got their butt kicked. They don't even have clothes. They don't have any weapons. They're just, and see this guy here with a knife. He's just finishing them off here. And then more of the same, battle scenes. I'll show the other side too, because this is really actually a lot more readable. Tallest guy, one break in the ceiling. As we said, the king and the attendants. And these people here are important. They're probably ministers, high priest, senators, something. And they're all listening to the king. They're facing him, very attentive. And they have they're drinking in the lap of luxury. And then back here, they have a harpist, somebody playing music. Wanted to mention this too, is that these are not the first people that invented music, by the way. We know music goes way far back. This is a level of instrumentation that we haven't seen previous to this. But we know that ancient people, I mean, really, really ancient people, knew that if you took a hollow reed and you blew on it, you could make a whistling sound. Then they figured out that if you drilled holes, made holes in it, you could have something of a flute. And if you notched it, it could be even better and louder. Anyway. So this is the top. This is the middle. And when we talk about the Wonka vase, this is prosperity. These are people and they're bringing in the livestock. And we still do some of that stuff like a state fair, and you got your prize pigs and bulls and stuff. But these are the farmers, these are the landowners, these are the people that actually run the food production. And then on the bottom, we have the workers. And these are the people that harvest, they carry the grain. You can see there's some of these guys got a pretty heavy burden. But these are the workers. Now move out, talking about how they, in this time, put images together in a way that we would read them. Actually, I believe our language is kind of built around this kind of art. Like, what social status would you say these people are? They would be of high status. What would you call the people on the bottom? Low status. And so we still talk in a way that probably comes from these models of how things, life, were depicted thousands of years ago. And it's symbolic. There's nothing that says, it's kind of interesting. I want to add a little editorial here. Eastern cultures, especially in Buddhist cultures, they talk about everybody had the same status, everything. The person who plowed the fields was equally as important as the richest person. It was this kind of egalitarian, this kind of, the idea of social classes was kind of boring. And so that was something that was kind of reawakened after the Second World War. A lot of Buddhist scholars started interacting and pointing out, how they thought of it. But bottom line, the Western model is pretty much like this. That if you're a lowly peon, you're going to be carrying the grain and doing the hard work. And if you're in the upper class, you would be listening to music, drinking wine, and just kicking back in your easy chair. Just saying. And so what they did a lot of at this time was memorialize particular events. And oftentimes there were no more important events than winning a war. And so this is the victory stela at Enantium. Excuse me. And so one last point. There's a ziggurat in much better shape. 4,000 years old, modern Iraq, and presumably on top was a temple at one time. But this is a great example. And this predates the pyramids too. So it's kind of nice to understand where this is chronologically. And so one last thing. I can get it here. One of the things that they did in Mesopotamia is that they developed written language. It's an important step forward. It's an advancement. And here are the characters of their language. It's called cuneiform writing. And it's, we don't fully understand it, but we have a lot of scholars that have been breaking the code. A lot of the things that we know from Mesopotamian artifacts kind of point to a lot of other things that we know in terms of the historical record, things like floods and earthquakes and things that we know happen because geologists can see it when they do their digs, and we find out in the written record that, hey, this really happened. There's a corollary. Good example of that is that in Mesopotamia, one of the earliest books, written accounts, was Tales from Gilgamesh. And it describes a story about a great flood where all of the animals were collected and put on a large boat. And it's a little dissimilar, but it's very similar to Noah and the ark that comes from the Bible. So you see a lot of these things crossing paths, a lot of cross-pollination, and as you can see, we're marching into advanced civilization, much more than we studied last week in cave art. And you guys have been pretty good. I've been trying to keep you awake. And so, is it warm in here to you guys? I thought so too. I'm like, anyway. Any questions? Well, in that case, I will see you Thursday. You too, thank you.